Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, the full version is available on Patreon. I'll be uploading all my content there going forward.
Chapter 1. Finally, it's almost here. Don Juan rode his horse to a hillside. He dismounted, and the heavy chainmail on his body made a metallic friction sound, which was particularly loud in this quiet land. Don Juan wears an iron bucket helmet, a black burqa over the chainmail, and a long sword hanging from his waist. He looks like a knight and aristocrat, and walks up the hillside. Behind the hillside, a few wisps of human smoke can be seen. It was a mountain village built along the river. According to the standards of villages in this world, the mountain village is not small, with several hundred households. It can be regarded as one of the largest large villages. The houses in the village are mostly made of wood, and they are arranged in an orderly manner. There is a wooden fence around the outermost perimeter. Large fields of wheat can be seen in the distance. A dirt road stepped on by people crosses the whole village, and on the gate in the middle of the wooden fence, 3 large characters can be vaguely seen: ZU Town. Are you kidding me? Don Juan was taken aback. He once again took out his Imperial Wilderness Development parchment. Don Juan still remembered that when the nobleman of the Empire, Earl Bergenrath, sold him this development parchment, he clearly said, "You are very lucky, it just so happens that I still have the territory of a wilderness town left here." Wilderness town. City. Nima, can this thing be considered a town? You're kidding me. Don Juan realized that he had been played. This can only be regarded as a village. Walking down the hillside, I approached the village. At the gate of the village, there were 2 bare-bottomed children playing with the mud. "Child, is this ZU Town?" Don Juan took a deep breath, and his voice came through the iron barrel helmet. The 2 children were having a mud fight with each other at the moment. As soon as Don Juan came over, the 2 children accidentally splashed some mud on Gu Yuan's burqa outside the chain mail. At this time, a thin middle-aged wooden man with a short stature walked out of the village. He happened to see this scene, and he seemed to see some great fear. The middle-aged farmer ran forward like crazy, knelt down in front of Don Juan with a plop and shouted in fear, "My lord, please forgive them, they are just 2 children." And his kneeling immediately attracted the attention of others. When the other villagers saw Tang Wen's outfit, it seemed as if a chain reaction had been triggered. They huffed and fell to their knees, yelling all over their mouths. Although the voices were mixed, there was a look on their faces, that is panic. The level of this world is equivalent to about the 7th and 8th centuries in the west of the earth. Productivity and steel refining technology are extremely low, so armor and weapons are extremely expensive. And Don Juan's equipment is enough to buy a manor. Although this armor is nothing to Don Juan, in the eyes of ordinary poor people, it is definitely only available to nobles. Needless to say, what happened to this ordinary poor man in the feudal era who offended the nobles? That's why they are so panicked. Quiet. Don Juan was so agitated by their quarrel that he even yelled loudly. All the villagers only felt a buzzing in their ears. Immediately, the tinnitus continued, and everyone became quiet at this moment. They knelt on the ground and looked at Don Juan in horror. "I won't pursue what happened just now. Now I ask you, is this ZU Town?" Don Juan looked around and asked. "You are the Baron Pioneer who wants to come here, this is indeed ZU Town." At this moment, a middle-aged knight in chainmail and a burqa came out of the village. "Are you sure it's a town, not a village?" Don Juan looked at him through the helmet. "It has a population of over 1,000, has its own army of soldiers, and has a wall of at least 3 meters. All of this has reached the standard of a mainland town." The knight smiled and said, "Let me introduce myself. I am the garrison knight of ZU Town, Lasso. Can you show me your development order?" After checking the Empire Development Sheepskin Scroll and confirming that it was correct, Lasso laughed even wider. But Don Juan frowned under the helmet, because he felt that the smile of the knight in front of him always had a feeling of relief. Your Excellency the Baron, please sign your name on this handover order, and then I can take people away. There was not much to say between the two parties. After Don Juan signed the handover order, the knight left with his followers and team. Don Juan stood at the entrance of the village, watched the knight leave, and sighed. As soon as he turned his head, he saw a group of villagers kneeling on the ground looking at him eagerly. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Don Juan's heart. Officially owning the territory, Minecraft components have been unlocked. This is Gu Yuan's Golden Finger, a mount and blade system with technology production, Minecraft and Artisan MOD. Open the personal panel. Name, Tang Juan, PS, the word is pronounced Huang. Race, human. The following is the property panel. Strength, 6-5. Agility, 4-5. Intelligence, 1-5. Charm, 2-0. Iron Bone, 10. Strike, 1-0. Strong Bow, 1-0. Strong Throw, 10. Weapon Mastery, 10. Shield Defense, 6. Running, 1-0. Riding, 6. Domination, 6. Transaction, 6. Weapon Proficiency, one-handed weapon, 327 two-handed weapon, 376 long pole weapon, 296 bow and arrow, 168 throwing, 167. Chapter 2. My lord, I don't understand. Ziyu town has a population of more than 1,000, and the annual tax revenue is at least a dozen gold coins. This is a lot of money. Why is the Earl so eager to give up? In the team leaving the wilderness, a knight squire rode a horse and walked side by side with Lasso Knight. He asked puzzledly. The tax of more than a dozen gold coins per year is indeed not small. You have not been in the wilderness for a long time, so it's normal if you don't understand it. Lasso waved his hand and said, It's autumn now, what year is next year? What year is next year? The knight servant was stunned, and said, This year is the year of the devil's famine, next year. Speaking of this, the face of the knight servant turned pale. He spat out 3 words in horror, Next year will be the year of the devil. And now it's the end of autumn, and winter is about to begin. After winter, once spring begins, there will be a disaster that only occurs once in a few decades. Yes, next year will be the year of the demon disaster. At that time, those disgusting barbarians, orcs, and half-orcs in the wilderness will all riot. Decades ago, the Empire defeated those orcs united tribes in the last year of the catastrophe, but that was when the Empire was strong. You and I both know that the Empire is now decayed, so the wilderness cannot be preserved. When Lasso said this, a gloomy look appeared in his eyes. As a knight, he obviously has a patriotic heart. Although he doesn't want to see it, the decline of Carla's empire is an established fact. That's why the Earl is in a hurry to sell all his territory in the wilderness. Even if it's only 100 gold coins. And just at this time, that bully named Don Juan came. Humph, is it so easy to be a nobleman? I think he only has a few months to live for a nobleman bought with money. There was obvious disdain in Lejuo's mouth. As an orthodox nobleman, Lejuo obviously had the pride and dignity of an old-fashioned nobleman. He looked down on those who bought noble titles with money. Lejuo led his team and left the wilderness as if fleeing. When he left the wilderness, the knight entourage rode on the horse and looked back through the iron bucket helmet. Poor commoner, even if you get the nobleman you dream of, the title is only available for a few months. Would Don Juan not know about the year of demon disaster that will come next spring? No, Don Juan is well aware. And the fundamental reason why he still buys the title and acquires the territory is his confidence in himself and the system. Put the mount and blade system aside for now. Let's talk about the Minecraft mod. Don Juan also played the game Minecraft in his previous life, so Don Juan understands it very well. This damn game doesn't make sense to you at all. It couldn't be easier to develop. Tang Heng stood at the gate of Ziyu town, looking at the villagers kneeling in front of him. Even though everyone thinks that Ziyu town is a town, Tang Heng from the 21st century still thinks that it is a small village. Taking off the iron bucket helmet on his head, a handsome and young face was revealed. Finally, he could take off the helmet. Although Don Juan was very strong, he was still extremely cautious. If it was not necessary, Don Juan would not take off the iron helmet in the wild. And now, if he hadn't just arrived in the territory, the people in the territory must be familiar with his appearance, otherwise Don Juan would wear an iron bucket helmet even in the town. When Don Juan was very weak when he first came to this world, he almost died. Even though he has become stronger now, Don Juan is still very cautious. This noble master is so young. All the villagers were shocked. Who is the village mayor? Don Juan looked around and asked. My lord, I am what I am. At this moment, a fat man stood up from the crowd and came to Don Juan. Well, let them all get up, don't need to kneel, just bow when they see me in the future, don't need to kneel down every now and then. Don Juan nodded and said. Yes, you're not all up yet, the sir asked you all to get up, so you don't have to kneel. The mayor immediately yelled loudly, and the people in front of him all stood up awkwardly. What's your name and where do I live? Don Juan looked at the mayor and asked. Go back to my lord, my name is Harlaus, sir, you go this way, your castle is in the center of the town. Along the way, he followed Harlaus to the center of the town, and Don Juan walked cautiously along the way. Without him, it's too dirty, feces and garbage can be seen everywhere along the road. The road is even more muddy. And it hasn't rained at all recently, so why are the roads muddy? With the feces everywhere, Don Juan didn't dare to think about it. At the same time, Don Juan made up his mind to rectify. Hygiene issues must be rectified first. Not to mention polluting the mind and mood, such a dirty and messy environment is definitely full of bacteria. Don Juan himself is not afraid of germs and poisons, and the 10th level iron bone gave Don Juan an extremely powerful physical fitness. Basically, it can be said that it is invulnerable to all poisons. But for the health of our own people in the future, we must rectify it. At the gate of the town, Don Juan saw a castle in the center of the town from a distance. The entire castle is about 5 or 6 meters high, and the length and width are about 20 or 30 meters, just like a square fortress. There are only 2 floors. Although it looks a bit crude, the stone castle always looks more defensive than the wooden walls of the town outside. My lord, this is the castle that our town spent 2 years building. Don't worry, this place is absolutely safe. Harold said with a proud face. It took 2 years to build such a thing. Don Juan was startled. This is too hip. It took 2 years to build such a small castle with a height of 5 or 6 meters and 2 floors. The productivity of this world is really hard to describe. Don Juan himself didn't bring much luggage, and he only had 1 horse. Many things are placed in the system's carry-on inventory. Halaus, I have something for you to do. Even in the castle, Don Juan was still wearing chain mail. He looked at heralds and said. My lord, what is the matter? You should know how to read. Go and sort out the situation in the town. How many households are there? How many people are there in each household? What is their name? How much money is left over? Sort it all into a booklet, and tell me. Don Juan looked at Harlaus and ordered. As the lord of this place, all Don Juan in the territory must be in control. Chapter 3. Understood, my lord, don't worry. Harlaus nodded immediately, turned and left. When turning around to leave, Harlaus felt a little disappointed. It seems that this Lord Don Juan is no different from the previous nobles. He will conduct a census of food, money, and population. In Harlaus's view, Don Juan's census obviously wanted to know how much tax he could get every year and how much labor could be squeezed. In this era, taxes are still collected on a head-by-head basis. A family can be charged as much as there are people in a family. Even nobles can increase taxes very casually. The poor commoners of common are not treated as human beings at all. Only if they are tools. When will we be able to come to a nobleman who can really make us live a good life? Harold sighed inwardly. Originally, Harlaus thought that this young noble would be different, but now it seems that the nobles are all the same, they are all vampires. After Harlaus left, Don Juan sat on a wooden furniture chair and took tea from the belonging space of the system. Without special circumstances, Don Juan would not directly eat and drink things from unfamiliar places. Although he knew that his body was strong and invulnerable to all poisons, in this world, Don Juan had accidentally seen some unscientific and rather magical things. He has just arrived, and everything is unfamiliar, it is better to be careful, it is always good to be cautious. Almost 3 hours later. At the moment Don Juan is practicing sword in the castle. It took 3 hours of sword practice to improve my two-handed weapon proficiency by 0.1. Don Juan stopped waving the long sword with both hands. Sure enough, his strength has reached the bottleneck, and the improvement of proficiency by simple practice is very small. Harlaus, what is this for? At this time, Don Juan looked at Harlaus and walked into the castle with a few young people pulling a wooden cart. There are a lot of stone sheets piled up on the wooden cart. Master Don Juan, this is the census you want? Harold said with a surprised face. These slabs. Don Juan looked at the stone slabs with strange expressions on his face. This shit, the Stone Age? My lord, the town is too poor, and Lord Rousseau has taken away a lot of money from the town, and the parchments are also very expensive, we can't afford parchments to write on, so, my lord. Harlaus was obviously ashamed, talking to Don Juan. All right. Don Juan reacted. There is no such thing as paper in this world. The things that are generally used for writing are parchment scrolls, but the cost of parchment scrolls is not low, and only rich commoners and nobles can afford them, and ordinary poor people can't afford them at all. But a town mayor still uses these things to record, which is unexpected by Don Juan. Looks like things are worse in town than I thought. Don Juan thought to himself. My lord, after a new round of census, we have a total of 427 households in Ziyu town, with a total population of 1,897, including 1,264 men and 633 women. Harlaus began to read the new census to Don Juan. As for the food, because of the autumn harvest, there is still a lot of surplus. Ziyu town has almost 15,000 mu of land. We use the farming method of planting 2 crops and resting 1. The autumn harvest has a total of 5,000 mu of land. But now we only have more than 60,000 caddies of wheat left in the city, and most of the rest are stored in a granary outside the town by the lasso knights. Farmers in this world use the mechanism of planting 2 fields and resting 1, that is, the 3-field system. All the arable land is divided into 3 parts, 2 of which are planted, and 1 part is rested to maintain soil fertility. After 2 years of continuous cultivation, each piece of land can be left idle for 1 year. And the 2 pieces of land that are cultivated each year are also divided into spring plowing and autumn plowing. What is harvested in autumn now is the grain planted last autumn. Hearing this statistic, Don Juan sighed. It was still a pain for the peasants. There were less than 2,000 people in the town. Excluding children and the elderly, anyone with good health had to work as an adult, no matter male or female. Therefore, there are less than 2,000 people in towns and cities, and there are almost 15,000 mu of land. The granary outside the city? How much grain is stored in it? When Don Juan heard the words, he asked. It's about 300,000 caddies. Harlaus replied. More than 300,000 caddies, plus the 60,000 caddies in the city, let's say it's nearly 400,000 caddies. In other words, the average yield per mu is only about 80 caddies. What was the tax in the past? Don Juan asked again. And hearing this, Harold's trembled in his heart. Asked about taxes, sure enough, the hateful vampire aristocrats, are taxes going to be raised? Harlaus was also from a peasant background, but he had travelled abroad and learned to write from a certain church monk, which is why he became a town. To be honest, his life as the mayor of the town is not much better than that of the townspeople in common. The situation in the town is not good, and even he can only eat enough. And if you want to talk about why he is a little fat when he is full just now, you must know that some people will get fat after drinking water. Constitution. Harlaus gritted his teeth, and said, generally, 60% is charged, and each household charges an additional amount according to the population. Generally speaking, 70% to 80% of a family's food for a year will be confiscated. Take away 70% to 80%. Don Juan fell into deep thought. For a family of 5, if everyone can work, they plant 50 acres of land a year, and the annual yield per mu is uneven. According to the best harvest situation, it is 100 caddies. In the early days, 5,000 caddies of grain a year. If 70% were taken away, there would be only 1,500 caddies of grain left. And for a family of 5, the 5 people get 1,500 caddies of grain a year. Normally, 100 caddies of grain, if you want to be full, is only enough for an adult to eat for about 80 days. In other words, in less than 3 months, for a family of 5, 1,500 caddies of grain for a year is enough for them to live through the year without starving to death. And it's ideal. Because sometimes the harvest is not good, and it is impossible to reach the yield of 100 caddies per mu, and it is more likely to be only about 80 caddies per mu. The real situation may be worse than this. Thinking of this, Don Juan understood everything he had seen before. This year and next year, there will be no taxation. Don Juan thought of this, and said to Harlaus, "My lord, if there is an additional charge, then everyone will really starve to death." "Ah! What did you say, my lord?" Harlaus blurted out a sentence without even thinking about it, but before he finished speaking, he reacted abruptly, staring at Don Juan in disbelief. Harlaus was trembling all over his body, his mouth was wide open, and tears glistened in his eyes. "Master Don Juan, what did you say?" "My lord seems to say, this year and next year, no tax." A young man pulling a cart spoke in a trance. "I said that there will be no taxation this year and next year, and not only will there be no taxation, but in the future, only 40% of the annual harvest will be enough to pay taxes." Don Juan retracted the two-handed long sword into its scabbard and sat on a chair. As soon as the young men pulling the cart came to their senses, they knelt down to Don Juan under the leadership of Harlaus. "My lord, you..." As soon as Harlaus began to speak, he began to cry. From now on, he no longer has to watch the townspeople go hungry. How blissful it would be to have no one starving scene. Several young people behind them also fell into the fantasy of a better life, and some even drool. For them, they don't have to go hungry in the future, and these 7 words are the goal they have been striving for all their lives. And at this moment, Don Juan clearly saw +30 green appearing on the heads of Harlaus and these young people. This is loyalty. And after this word came out, Don Juan also unlocked the loyalty panel. After opening the loyalty panel, it was clear that Harlaus and these people had a loyalty of at least 80 or more. Loyalty of 60 is a passing line. The loyalty of 80 is very high. And Don Juan knew that there would be a lot of upside in the future. Later, Don Juan learned about the situation in other towns. It was very bad. There was basically no money left in the town. There was some money before, but when the lasso knight left, he took it away. Chapter 4. Harlaus, go and gather all the townspeople, and I will announce this myself. Don Juan got up from his chair. This is a matter of improving the loyalty of the people in his own territory, and he has to do it himself. Yes, yes. Harlaus stood up from the ground like an old dog turning over, and then led the young people out of the castle. Harlaus ran on the muddy road in the center of the town, yelling loudly, "Everyone come out, gather in front of the castle, Lord Don Juan has something important to announce." They were all yellow and thin, and cautiously poked their heads out of the house. "It's important, what is it? Is the new nobleman going to raise taxes for us? Damn it, these aristocrats, we are human too, if we add taxes, can we still survive?" Sure enough, nobles are all the same. I shouldn't have hoped for it before. This place has a history of 20 or 30 years, and there have been many nobles before. Originally, the tax was not so heavy, but one by one the nobles kept increasing taxes here, and finally it is like this. Harlaus. Did you end up becoming a lackey of the nobles too? Bah! Running dog! Go to hell! An angry young man grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground and threw it directly at Harlaus. Harlaus couldn't dodge in time, and was thrown a mouthful of foul-smelling soil. He coughed uncomfortably, and at this time the young people following Harlaus shouted one after another, "Everyone, Don Lord Huang is a good nobleman, he does not raise taxes, everyone can rest assured." No tax increase? Then what is he going to do? No matter what you want to do, it's always good not to raise taxes. Let's go to the front of the castle to see. Go! Go! In the end, they were persuaded, and one by one began to gather in front of the castle. The town is very small, and Don Juan standing on the castle sees all of this. Nearly 2,000 people from the whole town gathered in front of Don Juan's castle. And Don Juan stood on the top of the castle wall for the convenience of speaking and seeing everyone. Everyone in Ziyu town. I am Don Juan, a baron who is new to this place. Tang Wan's breath sank to his dantian, and his voice was like a bell, making sure that everyone heard his voice. I know that some of you must be secretly scolding me at this moment, calling me a vampire noble. And you don't know me, I'm different from those nobles outside. Everyone was listening to Don Juan's speech in silence, some were expressionless and looked on coldly, and some of them expressed hope to Don Juan. Nearly 2,000 people, in various poses and with different expressions. I am different from the nobles outside because I know the sufferings of the people. Here I declare that this year and next year's tax will no longer be collected. You can keep all the harvest. And for the tax collected after next year, I will pay the nobles' tax. I swear by my identity, I will only charge 40%. Until I die. Don Juan took a deep breath and said loudly. When this passage came out, everyone's eyes widened immediately, and they looked at Don Juan standing on the castle in disbelief. Is this all true? The middle-aged Muna farmer who was the first to beg Don Juan for mercy at the gate of the town opened his eyes wide, and tears flowed out uncontrollably, soon covering his withered face. From now on, never go hungry again. Tim, slap me, I'm not dreaming. A young man who was hit by this huge surprise lost his legs and sat on the ground. He shook his hand and pulled his companion beside him. But he found that Tim had fainted to the ground because of excessive joy. This is not an exaggeration, they were as surprised when they heard the news as when a common man on earth in Don Juan's previous life learned that he had won a 5 million lottery. Absolutely great bliss. Long live Don Juan! Long live! No matter what kind of emotion is excessive, it needs to be vented. Joy was no exception. Immediately, the nearly 2,000 people present cheered crazily. They shouted the name of Don Juan. And Don Juan looked at the numbers rising in front of him with a smile. +40. +50. +38. It's all about loyalty. Ding! The average loyalty of the people in the territory reaches 75. Hearing this hint, Don Juan's smile grew wider. Harlaus! Don Juan cried out. My lord! Harlaus, who had been standing behind Don Juan before returning, stepped forward immediately. Where is the town's granary? I want to distribute some to the people in the town. Asked Don Juan. Granary. When Don Juan mentioned this, the smile on Harlao's face froze. What's wrong? Noticing Harlao's expression, Don Juan asked. My lord, I also said before that the surplus grain that needs to be taxed this year is in the granary, but that belongs to Earl Bergenrath. The granary is 5 miles outside the city. The lasso knights in charge of Zu town sent 30 men to garrison there, fully armed, and 20 of them even had bows and arrows. When they left, they didn't take the food away because they were short of manpower, but sir, they will definitely come again. My lord, there is no need to move that granary. There is still a part of the grain in the town that has not been sent away. This grain can barely feed the townspeople. The townspeople can bear with it for a while. Anyway, there will be a batch of harvest in the spring of next year. Food. Harlaus was obviously lonely, he said. Count Bergenrath was the nobleman who sold the territory to Don Juan. No, those grains must be obtained. Harlaus doesn't know, but Don Juan knows that in the spring of next year, those barbarians and orcs in the depths of the wilderness will all riot. Harvesting grain at that time would be too risky, and now there is not enough grain in the town. Therefore, that granary must be taken down. My lord. Harlaus gritted his teeth and said, I'm going to gather the young people in the town now. We'll dispatch all of them, at least a few hundred people, and we should be able to grab the food. No. Don Juan stretched out his hand and stopped Harlaus from leaving. It's enough for me alone. My lord, that's 30 people. Harlaus' eyes widened. Night. 5 miles away from Zu town, there is a granary. Several bonfires were lit, illuminating the surrounding darkness. Come. Drink. Ha 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 ha. A group of soldiers in padded cotton armor and pot helmets held wooden cups in their hands. The yellow liquid of ale in the cups reflected the light of the campfire, making it appear crystal clear. Wooden shields and swords were thrown all over the place by drunken them. They were guarding in front of a granary without any sense of crisis at all. However, there were 2 people who did not participate in it, a tall knight retinue wearing light chain mail, a pot helmet, and a long sword at his waist. The other is common soldier in padded armor. Master, when are we leaving? In about a month, Sir Lasso will have to return to the nearest territory, and then bring people to fetch food. 1 month later, okay, go early and be quick, I don't want to wait until next year to be killed by those disgusting savages or orcs with those pariahs. The soldier glanced in the direction of Zu town and sneered. And in the darkness not far away, a petite black figure was approaching the granary on tiptoe. Not tall, and a little delicate. Hey, grain, the taste of grain. Chapter 5. My lord, the granary is in front of me. We have already found out the situation inside. There were 30 of them, and 20 of them had bows and arrows, my lord, or we'd better go back and gather the young men of the town. There are a lot of men in the town, and there are hundreds of them who can fight. Behind the granary on a dirt slope in the direction of Zu town, Harlaus was persuading Don Juan. He really didn't want Don Juan to take risks. From the perspective of equipment, Don Juan was wearing heavy chainmail and an iron barrel helmet. This kind of equipment is basically considered to be the existence with top defense in this era, but there are 30 people on the opposite side. There was also a knightly squire in light chain mail. No, people in the town can't go there, and no one can die in the town right now. You go back and inform the people in the town, and let them send someone to fetch food. Don Juan shook his head. Although it is not that hundreds of peasants cannot beat 30 soldiers, it is just that Don Juan is not willing to let his people die. There are less than 2,000 people in the small town, and now there are 1 death and 1 less. These are Don Juan's property. Under Don Juan's repeated orders, Harlaus finally went back. My lord, I'll go back and call someone now, I can't put you in danger, you are the hope of our town. When Harlaus left, he made up his mind that Don Juan must not be put in danger. Don Juan was a good nobleman. Harlaus believed that in the future, under the leadership of Don Juan, they would definitely live a happier life than ordinary people. Life. Harlaus loyalty plus 10. Harlaus's loyalty has reached 90 now. It's almost full at 10 o'clock. After Harlaus left, Don Juan turned his head and continued to look in the direction of the granary. At this moment, Don Juan discovered something. Don Juan's eyesight is far superior to that of ordinary people. Even in the dark, he can see very clearly. Just outside the corner of the granary, a petite black shadow is creeping around, trying to enter the granary secretly. But the night servant guarding the door of the granary did not eat dry food. Who? He shouted loudly, which immediately alarmed all the drunken soldiers. It's over, it was discovered by. The petite black figure trembled, turned around and ran away. But there were 30 people here, and she was soon surrounded by running around. The night entourage pressed his right hand on the hilt of his waist, and held a torch in his left hand to look forward. There was a petite girl in leather armor with a sword hanging around her waist. At this moment, the young girl looked embarrassed, her blonde hair was disheveled, her small face was exquisite and beautiful, especially those emerald green eyes, which were even more crystal clear against the firelight. Look what I found, an elf thief. The corner of the night servant's mouth curled up, and he walked up casually. His attention was not on the girl's beautiful face, but on the pointed ears protruding from the strands of blonde hair. Fight! The elf girl gritted her teeth. In this case, if she resisted forcefully by herself, there would definitely be no way out. The next moment, the short sword around her waist was drawn out. Then she took out half of it from her pocket, obviously a dirty glove she picked up from somewhere, and threw it at the face of the night servant, saying, I am a cavalier. As a knight, I challenge you to a duel. This move undoubtedly stunned everyone. Duel! Ha 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 ha! Immediately, everyone laughed out loud as if they had heard some big joke. I've never heard of it. When can a woman become a knight? Let alone a stuttering elf. After the night servant laughed, a sneer appeared on his face. However, it's very interesting. It's just fun in such a ghost place. I accept your duel. The night entourage drew out the long sword at his waist, and the surrounding soldiers consciously made way for a circle. The night retinue knew very well that the elf girl in front of her could not be a knight at all, and she was not qualified to initiate a duel, but this is very interesting, isn't it? He just plays with her. Successful. A little excitement appeared in the elf girl's heart, but soon a wave of fear also rose in her heart. The trembling hands holding the short sword betrayed her. Is it really possible for her to defeat the night entourage in front of her? And at this moment, Don Juan in the distance saw the right opportunity. He took out a bow and arrow from the belonging space of the system, bent the bow and set the arrow at this moment, and aimed at the night servant. Ever. The bowstring sounded, and a rough arrow immediately pierced through the air. When there was an extremely obvious sound of metal collisions, and the head of the night servant who was wearing a pot helmet trembled, and the pot helmet on his head obviously had a dent. The arrow was bounced off. FK, the bow of this era is too weak. Don Juan cursed. Don Juan's own strength is huge, but there is no way. The bow and arrow are not good, and even Don Juan has to carefully control the strength, because the bow is broken by him accidentally. This kind of rubbish bow is not easy to use at all, which is why Don Juan's proficiency in bows and arrows is not high. There are others. Alert! Immediately, everyone present was startled. The night servant was even more frightened, the heart in his chest was beating rapidly. Just now, if the bow and arrow were lowered further, it would hit the back of his neck. Although the back of his neck is also covered with light chain mail, the chain mail itself is not very stab resistant, and the night retinue has no confidence that his neck will not be pierced. And Tang Wan's proficiency in bow and arrow is not high. This distance Tang Wan actually wanted to shoot the body, who knew that he hit the head by mistake, and what was even more embarrassing was that he hadn't broken the defense yet. It is indeed Don Juan's mistake to use the bow at this moment, and it is better to use the spear. I can only go through it recklessly. Don Juan retracted the bow and arrow, and then stepped onto the horse covered in chainmail behind him. Cross big span big span big span big. The loud sound of horseshoes sounded immediately in this dark night. Don Juan picked up the wooden lance hanging on the side of the horse. The horse rushed towards the 30 soldiers at an astonishing speed. In the dark night, only this small place is flickering with the light of the bonfire. The elf girl Minalia widened her eyes. Against the firelight, a pair of green eyes looked crystal clear and moist, which was the natural color favored by elves. Wherever he looked, he saw a powerful knight with man and horse in full armor charging violently from the night. In this dark night, this extremely impactful picture was deeply reflected in the heart of this elf girl who yearned for the way of knights. Chapter 6. Where did this knight come from? Stop him! Block him! A group of soldiers immediately became confused. And at this very moment, Don Juan charged over in such an incomparably brutal rampage on his armored horse. Ah! The screams wafted out in the dark night along with the sound of bones breaking. The violent charge of the armored horse killed the 2 leading soldiers first. No! Facing the charging mighty force, the knight servant had no choice but to dodge, but it was too late. I can only watch helplessly as the sharp lance stabs fiercely with a huge and incomparable impact force. Under the huge momentum of the horse's charge, the sharp lance easily penetrated the chainmail on the knight's servant, and then the entire lance penetrated his body. Hiss la la! The war horse raised its hooves and roared. Don Juan picked it up vigorously, and the blood dripped down. The corpse of the knight's entourage hung on the 3-meter-long lance like this, and he picked it up in the air. Kill the knight retinue, gain 300 experience points and increase the pole weapon proficiency by 0.5 points. Master Soda is dead. OMG. Don't be afraid, he's only one person. Bow, bow. Shoot him. The rest of the soldiers woke up one by one, they picked up their bows and arrows in horror, and shot at Don Juan. Arrows hit Don Juan and the horse under him. But to no avail. These bows and arrows are only short bows, and they can't shoot through the heavy chainmail on Don Juan and his horse. The arrows were lightly hung on Don Juan's body, and the next moment, the horse charged again. Don Juan, who is covered in armor including men and horses, is like a killing machine, rampaging here. Kill a common soldier, gain 80 experience points and increase the pole weapon proficiency by 0.3 points. Kill a common soldier, gain 75 experience points and increase the proficiency of pole weapons by 0.4 points. Kill a common soldier, gain 85 experience points and increase the proficiency of pole weapons by 0.5 points. Ah! Help! Help! Bows and arrows can't pierce his armor at all. After Don Juan killed a few more people in a row, these soldiers collapsed. Enter the granary. He can't get through the door of the granary on horseback. At that time, he can only dismount. Suddenly, a soldier was in a hurry, and he shouted. Yes, enter the granary. At this moment, there were still more than 20 soldiers. They didn't care about so many people, and they all used up their granary in one go. Enter, the granary. Minalia couldn't help worrying about this powerful knight. Minalia is very clear about the difference between a knight with a horse and one without a horse. A knight with a horse can kill 10 times as many enemies in devious battles with great mobility. But once dismounted, it is no different from infantry. But Don Juan didn't hesitate at all, he rode his horse directly to the granary. If you get off the horse, he can't, 2 dozen people. Minalia was very anxious, she didn't want the powerful knight who appeared at this moment to die. He's coming. Don't close the door. Let him in, the horse won't be able to charge up in the granary at all, and he will have to be slaughtered by us. Immediately, the confidence and morale of the soldiers in the granary increased greatly. Do you think I have nothing to do after entering the granary? If I dismount, I will be better than riding a horse. When the war horse was about to approach the door of the granary, Don Juan dropped his lance and drew out the sword at his waist. The next moment something happened that stunned everyone. Don Juan jumped off the fast-moving horse. If it is an ordinary person, this kind of impact force will jump directly, and they will be half disabled if they don't die. But Tang Juan has a 10th level iron bone bonus, so this impact force is nothing. What? How dare he? Before a soldier near the door of the granary could finish his sentence, he was killed by a sword from Tang Juan, who jumped down. A large amount of blood spurted out, and Don Juan, holding a sword, fell to the ground together with the soaring head under the rain of blood. Good, strong. Menalia spat out these 2 words in a daze. There is only one person, get off the horse, let's go. At the instigation of a soldier, the 20 people present shouted and launched an attack. Don Juan didn't even want to slash directly at the soldier who rushed to him first. And the soldier wanted to resist with the shield in his hand. But the next moment, he was split open by the man and the shield. The sword that Don Juan uses is not the kind of thin iron sword, but a 2-handed sword that is not very sharp. The blade is very thick. Accompanied by immense power, the great sword directly shattered the wooden shield and the people under the shield. A killing is about to begin. Like catching a turtle in an urn, Don Juan surrounded 20 people by himself. Until the end of the battle, Menalia was still in a daze. And the next moment, an incomparably huge look suddenly burst out in her eyes. She ran to Don Juan, who was sitting at the door of the granary, wiping the blood with a rough cloth. Then she tripped over a rock on the ground. The elf girl just lay down in front of Don Juan in a dog-eat-shit motion. Don Juan turned his head expressionlessly. Ba-ba! Menalia's small face was raised from the mud. She vomited a few times like this, and then raised a small face full of mud. Against the faint firelight, only a pair of crystal-clear green eyes could be seen flickering constantly. You must be a powerful cavalry knight. Menalia looked at Don Juan with incomparable admiration. Are you okay? Don Juan asked out of concern. No, nothing. This setback is nothing. Hearing Don Juan asking herself, Menalia stammered slightly. Are you nervous? Don Juan looked at Menalia. No. Not nervous. Then why are you stuttering? Intrinsic. Menalia seemed very proud. Don Juan was quite speechless, seeing Menalia's pointed ears through the iron barrel helmet. An elf girl? And still a stutter? My name is Menalia. Please accept me as your servant. There was no stuttering in this sentence, and the speech was exceptionally proficient and fluent. Why didn't you stutter in this sentence? Don Juan frowned and asked. Hey, I have said this sentence many times. Menalia smiled embarrassedly, Kui Green's eyes slightly curved, but, because I am a woman, no knight, will accept me. I don't think you are disappointed by this? Asked Don Juan. Because of him, they have no vision, why women can't be knights. I will definitely prove myself. Menalia said these words with great passion, and there was great confidence in them. But because she always stuttered when speaking, this sentence sounded a little girlish. Chapter 7. What are elves like? After traveling to this world and hearing that there are elves in this world, Don Juan has always had a fantasy about elves in his heart. Influenced by various fantasy and magical works on the earth in his previous life, Don Juan always believes that elves are a noble, mysterious, cold, and beautiful image. But Don Juan sighed. He looked at the elf girl next to him, who had been talking endlessly for nearly 20 minutes and was still in high spirits. This little stammer doesn't have the slightest sense of stuttering at all. It's fine if you stutter a little, but you're still a chatterbox. God, the elves in my mind are not like this at all. Don Juan cried out helplessly in his heart. Master Don Juan! Here we come! Are you there? At this time, bursts of shouts sounded. Harlaus held a sickle in his hand, his chubby body trembled when he ran, and his round, red face was covered with sweat. Behind him followed a large group of humming people. They are all townspeople from Ziyu town, holding sticks and agricultural tools in their hands. They all looked very anxious. When Harlaus returned to the town, the people in the town were terrified when they heard that Don Juan attacked 30 armed soldiers alone. There was no need for Harlaus to convene, they spontaneously picked up various farm tools and gathered, and then ran towards here frantically. Hurry up! Don't put Don Juan in danger! Let's go! Let's fight those lackeys of the vampire nobles! Master Don Juan is the hope of our entire town to live a happy life. Don't let anything happen to you. Master Don Juan, you must be safe, we are here. In the whole town, men, old people, women, and children together, one counts as one, as long as they can run, all come. There were even dozens of old people trembling on crutches behind the team. 17 or 800 people, all of them came here. Don Juan gave them all the hope of living, and they didn't want such a good nobleman as Don Juan to die from the bottom of their hearts. Why are there so many people here? Don Juan was taken aback. Originally, he thought that 200 or 300 people would be enough to move things. In the end, I didn't expect so many people to come. It seems that people from the whole town have come here. Master Don Juan, where are the enemies? We are your subjects, and we will fight to the death to protect you. Although the townspeople were a little scared, they still insisted on coming here. Against the light of the surrounding fire, only a few sporadic corpses could be seen. This doesn't match what they know. So they had a guess in their minds that made them happy. After Lord Don Juan killed a few people, they should all run away. Yes, it must be so, thank God, Sir Don Juan is fine. All the townspeople said excitedly. Go and move all the grain in the granary back to the town. Don Juan didn't explain to them either, just said. Yes, yes. There is food. Everyone was extremely excited. Harlaus led the people into the granary first. But as soon as they entered the granary, they smelled an extremely strong smell of blood. Immediately, Harlaus and the others froze at the door of the granary. This. Harlaus felt that he could no longer hold the sickle in his hand, and his legs were constantly swinging. They stared blankly at the scene in the granary. I saw a number of incomplete corpses lying on the ground in disorder. There are broken iron swords and broken shields everywhere on the ground. And next to the broken weapon are the stumps and arms that are different from the whole corpse. OMG! These are all made by Sir Don Juan. So strong, Master Don Juan is too strong. The eyes of many young men are full of admiration. In this barbaric age, the strong are the objects of reverence for all. Not to mention, this strong man is their ruler. Loyalty +5. Loyalty +6. Don Juan over there didn't expect another reminder to increase his loyalty to sound at this time. Ding! The first leader with full loyalty in the territory appeared, name, Ragnar. Such a hint caught Don Juan's attention. Move all the food back. Don Juan stood up and said. Oh! Ha ha ha! Ragnar! You bring some men back to town to bring the ox cart. Harlaus yelled at a young man. This caught Don Juan's attention, and Don Juan looked over, only to see a young man who was much taller than the others was also looking at Don Juan. There was extremely strong admiration in his eyes. Seeing Don Juan looking at him, it was obvious that he was very excited. This young man was at least 2 meters tall, but he was very thin. With his height, he looked like a stick. And Don Juan obviously noticed him. He is Ragnar? So tall, is he a titan? Don Juan could only think about how to grow so tall when everyone was not getting enough to eat. This kid is a good material, thought Don Juan. There are more than 300,000 caddies of grain in the entire granary. These grains have been handed in by the townspeople in the past few years. Now, under the command of Don Juan, they have been brought back to the town. After returning to the town, Don Juan was relieved, and there was no need to worry about food for the time being. The only thing to worry about at this stage is Earl Bergenlas. These grains belonged to him, and the Lasso Knights did not take the grains because of lack of manpower. There is more than 300,000 caddies of grain. It is impossible for Earl Bergenlas to give up, so there will definitely be a team coming here to take away the grain. At that time, if they find that the food has been taken away by Don Juan, I am afraid that the two sides will go to war directly. However, because of the road, Earl Bergenrada's team will not come until at least a month later. The soldiers before the town were taken away by the Lasso Knights, and Don Juan wanted to form an army of his own within this time. Now it's time to go and have a look inside my world map. Thinking of this, after making sure that no one was around, Don Juan opened the portal in the castle. After the faint light, a portal made of obsidian that looked like a portal to hell materialized directly in front of Don Juan. Chapter 8. Loading the map. Map loading complete. After entering the portal, 2 messages flashed in front of Don Juan. When he opened his eyes again, the surrounding environment had changed. Don Juan appeared in a forest. The surrounding environment is not a world made up of squares as Don Juan imagined, but a scene that looks no different from the real world. This is my world map. The actual map of my world is not square. Don Juan complained a bit, and then walked towards a tree. There is a truth in my world. That is, if you want to be rich, you must first pluck trees. Don Juan was going to experiment to see if he could really pull a tree. When Don Juan came to a tree, he directly raised his hand and hit that tree. Bump! After 11 punches in a row. Touch! Stick it! The whole tree made a sound and fell down. After knocking down the tree, Don Juan frowned. With his strength, such a tree with a diameter of more than 10 centimeters should be broken by him in just a few punches, but now it took 11 punches to break it. Thinking of this, Don Juan chose a small tree that had just grown up, and the trunk was only the thickness of a fist. Don Juan raised his fist again and struck. 11. Another 11. It seems that pulling a tree with a fist has nothing to do with the strength itself. No matter what size tree you use with your fist, you can knock it down with 11 blows. Don Juan gradually understood. Open the system portable space. Inside, there are 2 wooden blocks being superimposed. And next to the system belongings space, a small grid with 4 grids appeared there. Don Juan tried to follow the common flow of the game to place the wooden blocks, and then 4 wooden boards appeared. Arrange 2 boards up and down to form 4 sticks. Looking at the 4 round sticks in his hands, they looked like identical wooden sticks made uniformly in a factory workshop in the 21st century. Don Juan was lost in thought. Sure enough, my world map doesn't make sense to you at all. Everything follows the rules of the game. Of course, there is still a little difference. For example, Don Juan looked at the trees he had knocked down. In the original game, after the tree is cut from the middle, it will not fall to the ground, but will float in place. It is simply paid off by the existence of Newton. Don Juan synthesized a workbench out of 4 more planks. The workbench appeared out of thin air, and Don Juan placed the workbench on the ground. He continued to pluck the tree with his bare hands. After pulling out another piece of wood, it was divided into 4 planks. Don Juan looked at the workbench in front of him. There were 9 grids arranged in 3x3 on the workbench. Arrange 2 wooden sticks up and down, and then place 3 wooden boards in the 3 spaces on the upper left of the wooden sticks. In the next second, a light flashes, and a wooden axe is synthesized. Looking at the wooden axe in his hand. This wooden axe seems to be naturally generated, with a smooth surface and a seamless body. It is clearly a wooden axe blade, but it has been polished to be sharp. There is no doubt that a single axe can definitely kill a person. Thinking of this, Don Juan put all these things into the belongings space, and then left the map of my world. After returning to the castle in Ziyu town, Don Juan placed the workbench again, and took out the wooden axe and wood materials. He wanted to use the workbench, but Don Juan found that it was useless. No matter how Don Juan fiddled with the workbench, there was no response. It seems that things like workbenches can only be used in my world map, and they are useless outside of my world map. But this wooden axe has not changed in any way, which means that some things that have been formed in my world map can be taken out of my world map and continue to be used. Don Juan nodded. He quickly thought of the most unreasonable thing in my world. Redstone. Things like redstone are simply black technology. Power generation, automation, everything can be done by machines made of redstone without realistic common sense. My lord! Are you there? At this moment, a burst of yelling sounded outside the castle. You can't go in, Lord Don Juan is resting in the castle. Harlau's voice sounded too. That elf stutters. With a twitch in Don Juan's mind, he remembered the little elf stuttering who appeared outside the granary last night. Thinking of this, Don Juan waved his hand, closed the portal first, and then said to the outside, Harlaus, let her in. After getting permission from Don Juan, Harlaus had no choice but to let Minalia in. Snort! Minalia made a face at Harlaus, and then ran into the castle. I remember your name is Minalia, right? Don Juan looked at the elf girl trotting in and asked. Yes, yes. Minalia looked a little excited. I ask you, why do you want to be a knight? Asked Don Juan. Because, dream. Minalia stammered a little while looking at Don Juan with her emerald green eyes. Minalia was born in a backward elven tribe. Although elves sound noble, they are actually divided into two classes just like humans. Commoners and nobles. Minalia was obviously born in the commoner elf class. She was born in a weak commoner tribe. Minalia has seen too many unfair things in this unfair world in her life. She has seen the weak being slaughtered and plundered for no reason, and has seen all the dark sides of this dark feudal era. In addition, Minalia read some knight novels from humans, and it was inevitable that Minalia was affected by the powerful, righteous, compassionate, and honorable knights in those novels. Since no one can protect them from being weak, she will become strong by herself, and then protect the weak. That autumn, Minalia left her hometown and began to roam the continent. Don Juan looked at Minalia. This elf girl was dirty, and there was still some dirt on the old leather armor. This little girl, did you sleep outside all night? Don Juan's heart moved. Chapter 9. You want to be my servant? Don Juan looks at Minalia. Yes, it is. Minalia nodded. I am a baron. It is not easy to be a baron's entourage. You must have the strength to match it. I don't have great strength. But, I can learn. Minalia said slightly anxiously. Until you prove yourself, I won't accept you as a follower, but you can stay in the town. Soon I will form my own soldier team, you can stay, you can study with the soldiers. Said Don Juan. Great, great. Master Don Juan, I will definitely prove my own strength. Minalia jumped and cheered, her disheveled gold hair fluttered and fluttered. Harlaus, you go and arrange for someone to take her down for a bath. Said Don Juan. Yes, my lord. Harlaus accepted the order and found a few girls who were about the same size as Minalia in the town and asked them to take Minalia to the bathhouse. Although the town is very poor, it was built along the river, and there is indeed a bathhouse in the town. My lord, just now I heard you say that you want to build an army in the town. After Harlaus came back, he asked Don Juan. That's right, we must have our own armed forces. We took Earl Bear Genrada's food, and he will definitely retaliate. Don Juan nodded. But my lord, there are no weapons and equipment in the town. Originally, the only armed team in the town was the Lasso Knights, but after he left, he took the only team away. Now the only one in the town is the one that was picked up from the granary last night. More than a dozen bows. There are no other weapons or armor. Harold's was a little embarrassed. None of these things, Harlaus, I have a decree to issue, said Don Juan. Decree? My lord, tell me. I'm going to clean up the town and then build a few public toilets. People won't be able to defecate indiscriminately in the future. This will not be good for the sanitation environment or the health of the townspeople in the future. Public restroom? What's that? Hearing Don Juan's words, Harlaus felt a little strange. Obviously, he never had the concept of a toilet in his mind. This is the case in this era. Whoever wants to make it convenient can just find a place to solve it. There is no such thing as a toilet. It's a convenient place for the townspeople in the future, said Don Juan. Is it a cesspit? Harlaus asked. There is a place outside the town to dispose of the feces cleaned up from the streets, because it is unbelievable that feces are piled up on the streets. Every once in a while, the townspeople will spontaneously dispose of them, dig a hole outside the city and pour the cleaned up feces into it. Is there a cesspit? Harlaus showed me. Don Juan stood up and said to Harlaus. Because just now Don Juan remembered something. That is nitrate. At the edge of these places in the cesspit, there will be a white substance, which is some naturally occurring nitrate. Black powder can be made by mixing nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal in a certain proportion. This is the original gunpowder. And now Don Juan has another way to get gunpowder, which is a monster called Creeper in my world map. This kind of monster will explode itself, and killing the creeper before it explodes will get the gunpowder inside the creeper. However, it is very difficult to mass-produce gunpowder by this method. When he came to the cesspit outside the city, Don Juan couldn't help but frown and covered his nose slightly. The smell is indescribable. After careful inspection, Don Juan really found the nitrate. Harlaus, go find someone to organize a team of about 10 people to regularly clean up the excrement in the town, and then pour it here to collect this white powder. Don Juan pointed to some white matter on the edge of the cesspit and said to Harold's. My lord, what is this? Harold's asked puzzled. He really couldn't understand what Don Juan was doing. It's understandable to clean up the feces and make the town cleaner, but what is the white thing on the edge of these cesspools? Why collect these things? These things are very useful. In addition, organizing this team is not for nothing. Each person can get 100 copper coins per month, said Don Juan. Here, 100 copper coins. My lord, isn't this too much? Harlaus was taken aback. You must know that the towns generally grow their own food and are self-sufficient, with no additional income at all. Generally speaking, 50 copper coins a month is enough to keep the townspeople excited. Now he gave 100 copper coins in one go? Harlaus could imagine that the people in the town would be scrambling to sign up one by one. No, it's not much. The corners of Don Juan's mouth curled up slightly. He still has more than 20 gold coins deposited in the system at the moment, and if they were exchanged for copper coins, that would be more than 200,000. Not to mention, he found a mine in my world map before. Yes, Don Juan was very lucky. Just near the birth point of my world map, Don Juan found a mine. Although he didn't go in to see it, Don Juan believed that some copper and iron could be mined from it. Soon, Harlaus posted a notice in the middle of the town. This move undoubtedly attracted the attention of other townspeople. Harlaus, do you have any orders from Lord Don Juan? Asked a young man. Yes, Sir Alexis will set up a sanitation team to maintain the sanitation of the town, dig cesspit regularly, and build public toilets, said Harlaus. Maintaining town sanitation? Is it of any use? Many people do not understand this. For them, the concept of urban hygiene is very vague. You don't need to know this, you just need to know that those who join the health team can get 100 copper coins every month. Heralds yelled loudly. My god! Can you get 100 copper coins for digging a cesspit for a month? A young man cried out in astonishment. What? What 100 copper coins? Many people around were attracted. After Harlaus explained to them, they were all excited. My god, digging the cesspit and paying back the money, Mr. Don Juan is really a generous and benevolent nobleman. 100 copper coins a month, I want to join, I have great strength. It's okay to work or anything. The health team only recruits 10 people. I want to join, I want to join. Soon, hundreds of townspeople gathered around here, pushing forward one by one, squeezing the innermost Harlaus until he became thinner. Ragnar, 100 copper coins a month, why don't you go? On the periphery, a young man asked Ragnar at the side. No, I want to serve Lord Don Juan directly. Lord Don Juan will definitely form an army. I want to join Lord Don Juan's army. As soon as Ragnar mentioned Don Juan, there was a look of admiration in his eyes. Chapter 10. Soon, 10 members of the health team were selected. The 10 people who were selected stood here triumphantly. The other people who were not selected looked at the 10 people with envy. 100 copper coins a month. In the future, I can eat some salt when I eat, and I can add some simple clothes at home, so that my son will not run around naked all day when he is 7 or 8 years old. How enviable! Soon, a sanitation team of 10 went to the town warehouse to pick up some simple tools made of wood, and then began to clean up the town. Ziyu town is said to be a town, but according to Don Juan's calculations, it is actually a village with less than 2,000 people. Although it is tiring for 10 people to clean up, it will not take a few days. And it will be very easy for 10 people to carry out simple maintenance in the future. Harlaus found some more house builders, and according to Don Juan's order, he began to dig pits at the corners of the town's streets, and then built several public toilets. Of course, it's all made of wood. From now on, townspeople will go to the toilet here. They are all simple dry toilets. Maintaining these public toilets will be the task of the health team in the future. Don Juan stood on the castle and looked at the sanitation team that had already started working on the street, and he felt very relieved. After a few days, the town is obviously much cleaner. And it was time for Don Juan to move on to the next step. In addition to forming an army in Don Juan's plan, he also planned to build a city wall. Surround the whole town. The walls of the current town are made of wood. Although they have some defensive power, they are not as good as the stone walls. But according to what Harold said before, it took 2 years to build the castle where he lives now, and a project as large as the city wall will obviously take more time. But Don Juan has his own way. Now I have to go to my world map. Through the portal inside the castle, Don Juan opened his eyes again, still in the same position as before. Just next to it is the tree that was knocked down by Don Juan before. And Don Juan looks forward. There is a hill just ahead. And there is a hole in the middle of the hill, the hole is slanted downward, the inside is dark, it seems bottomless. And just beside the entrance of the cave, there is an open-air stone, under the sunlight, the stone reflects yellow light. Near the entrance of the cave, a few whistling sounds could be faintly heard from the mine. I don't know if it's the roar of the zombies or the sound of the wind. Is this light a gold mine? Or a copper mine? Don Juan walked over and examined it carefully, the color seemed to be brass. Not much to say, start working immediately. Don Juan first chopped down a few trees with the wooden axe before, and then used the workbench to make a wooden manuscript. The wooden draft, like the wooden axe, seems to be natural, hard and sharp. Start digging for rocks. After having the stones, use the workbench to make stone manuscripts according to the process of making wooden manuscripts. 8 stones are combined into a furnace, and wood is burned. Combine the charcoal with the sticks to make a torch. With torches and stone manuscripts, start mining. After officially entering the mine with a torch, Don Juan found out. This is a copper mine. What surprised Don Juan even more was that these copper mines were densely arranged in the mine. Unlike the scattered throughout the mine in the original game, this large area is all copper mines. With these copper mines, Don Juan can make copper coins and issue coins by himself. After continuing to go deep into the mine, Don Juan realized that he was overjoyed. You should be happy now. Because under the copper mine is a piece of iron mine. Haha, a game is a game, and I don't want to reason with you at all. In real life, who would have thought that there is a Nema iron mine under the copper mine? Don Juan was very excited. Now that iron ore has appeared, the problem of equipment is no longer a problem. But the fly in the ointment is that this mine is not big. After a day of digging, Don Juan finished the mine himself. A total of 37 groups of copper ore, 20 groups of iron ore, and 3 groups of gravel were excavated. 64 in each group. There are so many mines, how long will it take to burn them in a furnace? Don Juan decided to activate the Artisan MOD. In the other direction of Don Juan's birth point, there is a pool of water. There is sand on the edge of the pool. Clay can also be found at the bottom of the water. In my world, sand, gravel, and clay, when combined together, these 3 things become a very magical thing, cement. Tang Juan looked at the Artisan MOD manual issued by the system, and was about to start building the smelting furnace. First, burn out the black bricks with cement. Then build a smelting furnace with pitch black bricks. However, the process of building a smelting furnace was not as simple as Don Juan thought. If Don Juan came by himself, the whole project would take at least a week to complete. Thinking of this, I looked at the sky, and it was almost night. Don Juan decided to do it again tomorrow. Just got back to the castle from Minecraft. The next moment something happened that left Don Juan speechless. My lord, the elf is ready. After getting permission from Don Juan, Harlaus entered the castle to report. Ready? Ready for what? Don Juan just picked up a cup of tea and began to drink. Sleep, servant. Harlaus said. Puff. Don Juan spat out the tea with a mouthful. What the hell? Say it again. Don Juan was a little confused. My lord, don't you want to keep that elf girl? Harlaus was a little confused. Could he have misunderstood it? FK, who thinks about this? Don Juan was a little speechless. He really didn't want to do this. He and the little girl just met. How could it be like this? Ah! This evil feudal aristocracy. You go and inform Minalia and ask her to prepare. Tomorrow I will gather the young people in the town to build an army and let them train together. Don Juan sighed. He really had no idea about that little girl. Chapter 11. My lord is going to conscript. Ragnar. My lord is going to conscript. The next day, Ragnar, who had just finished preparing the spring seeds at home, was resting when he suddenly heard the voice of his friend outside the door. Accompanied by shouting all the way, my friend Lottie rushed in directly. What? Master Don Juan is going to conscript. Ragnar's heart trembled, and he immediately rushed out regardless. Well. As soon as Lottie entered the door, she saw a tall black figure rushing out, knocking him to the ground. After Ragnar rushed out the door, he ran towards the castle first. Along the way, I saw townspeople everywhere. And there are many people around the castle. Your Excellency will recruit 300 people to serve as the first round of recruits this time. All men can go. The selection will be held tomorrow. We will gather at the gate of the town and select 300 people to become recruits, and then conduct a 1-month recruit training. There will be a new recruit assessment in 1 month, and only 100 people will be selected to serve as official sergeants. It is also the personal guard directly under Don Juan. Harlaus was shouting loudly among the crowd. Originally, Harlaus was always called Lord Don Juan, but Don Juan felt that this title was full of the nature of a dark nobleman in the Middle Ages, and he was different, so he changed the title and asked someone to call him Sir. I am the strongest in the town, me. Don't squeeze, alas. My shoes are all squeezed out. At the moment, it is extremely noisy here, like a vegetable market. Everyone, stop arguing. I haven't said my salary yet, cried Harlaus. Whatever salary you want, I am willing to do things for Don Juan without money. A young man shouted, with admiration for Don Juan in his eyes. The weaker this era, the more yearning for the strong. Those who are selected do not need to engage in labor, and they will conduct full-time military training. Each person will receive 150 copper coins per month. After the recruit period, they will pass the recruiting assessment and become an army sergeant, and their salary will increase to 400 copper coins per month. The rest of the unselected personnel will join the common town soldiers team. Instead of receiving a fixed salary, the town soldiers will have intensive training once a month in the future. After the training is completed, each person will receive 20 copper coins. Harlaus yelled this sentence loudly. OMG! 400 copper coins per month after officially becoming a sergeant. Hearing this number, everyone was dumbfounded. For farmers like them who do farm work, are self-sufficient, and can't even eat enough, let alone 400 copper coins, even the 100 copper coins from the previous health team are quite a fortune. The young man who said that he could do without money also froze. He could no longer say that he didn't want money. It wasn't because he changed his mind, but because of this, that was too much. There are more than 1,800 people in the town, and the ratio of men to women is unbalanced. There are many men, and there are more than 1,200 people in the town. In the end, 100 completely full-time non-commissioned officers were selected. Not everyone can. In fact, Don Juan originally set the age to be under 25 years old, but first of all, this one has been refreshed for a large part. In this era, people who are over 25 years old are actually considered middle-aged. Because the average life expectancy of most civilians is about 40 years old. After the age of 25, most people's physical fitness is not good enough. All Don Juan would want to stipulate that he must be under the age of 25. But then Don Juan cancelled it again, because there were only so many people in the town, and this time the selection of soldiers was the tallest among the dwarfs. If there is an age limit, maybe everyone will not be able to get together in the end. Age is not a problem, as long as you are qualified after training. Don Juan urgently needs a group of soldiers to protect the town. With 200 part-time town soldiers and 100 full-time professional sergeants, as long as the city walls of the town are built, there is no problem in defending the city. The town is so big that it is more than enough to defend. To be honest, Don Juan completely underestimated the current enthusiasm of the townspeople. One day later, when Don Juan came to the gate of the town, he was stunned looking at the large crowd of people who were humming in front of him. This is, the men from the whole town are here, right? Grown-ups. Master Don Juan is here. As soon as Don Juan appeared, everyone cheered immediately. Don Juan had ringing in his ears. Just the shouting of 1,000 people can make people's ears uncomfortable, so what about 10,000 people? But it also shows that he really has the hearts of the people. Don Juan felt complacent for a while. Before Don Juan started to speak, he saw a small body poking his head out of the crowd, and a pair of emerald green eyes were constantly shining brightly looking at him. This little girl is also inside. The appearance of Minalia poking her head made Don Juan couldn't help but laugh. Fortunately, Don Juan was now wearing armor and a helmet, so no one could tell. The selection is ready to start. The selection this time is very simple, it just depends on your physical fitness. It's exactly 1 kilometer from the entrance of the town to the cemetery, you guys run over there now, 2 round trips. Don Juan said loudly. Originally, Don Juan wanted to make it a little more fancy, like an obstacle course of several hundred meters, but he had no choice but because the conditions are too simple and there are too many people coming. A total of 1,000 people, these people ran over one by one. When did they have to run? So simply, and rudely, a distance of 1 kilometer, running back and forth, 2 kilometers. And these townspeople usually do not have enough to eat, and generally have poor physical fitness. Originally, Don Juan wanted to get a 10-kilometer one, but after thinking about it, it seemed that it was really too difficult for them. So it was changed. Don Juan felt that a mere 2 kilometers should not be too embarrassing for them. If 2,000 meters is not enough, then you can run extra. Get ready, start. Harlaus gave an order from the side, and just as everyone was about to run, a petite figure rushed past them all. Manalia. The little girl rushed out immediately. It's like a big cat. A woman ran ahead of us. Let's go. You can't lose to a woman. As soon as these two sentences came out, everyone's hearts were immediately mobilized. They are men, how can a woman run ahead of them? Immediately, everyone ran desperately. But a scene happened that left Don Juan dumbfounded. Many people ran with all their strength, and after running 500 or 600 meters, they were already panting and sweating profusely. This, is your physical fitness too poor? Don Juan was dumbfounded. Chapter 12. Ragnar, can you still hold on? Among the running crowd, Lottie panted heavily, with slight sweat dripping from his forehead, and asked Ragnar next to him. It's okay, these are nothing. Ragnar is more than 2 meters tall and looks very thin. In fact, his weight is much heavier than the average person, but because he is too tall, he looks like a stick. And his physical fitness is actually pretty good. Now that the 1,000 meter run is almost over, he can still hold on for a long time. This should be natural. Even if the same is not enough to eat, there are always some people who are better than the common people. Ragnar is that kind of person. Don Juan came to a hillside early and watched a large group of people running there sparsely. Don Juan kept shaking his head. Too poor. Less than 1,000 meters, many people have died. If they were asked to jump up and down for an obstacle course, they would not even be able to pass the 200-meter obstacle course. But this is also normal. Most of the townspeople in Zu town simply can't eat enough to eat, and their poor health can be forgiven. As long as you enter the military camp and eat and drink well during training, you will always become stronger. After 1 kilometer, half of the people dragged behind, and many people even turned into walking. My lord, this is not bad. Harlaus was a little dazed. The distance of 1,000 meters is 2 miles, and when I run back, it is already 4 miles away. To be able to run the entire city, in Harlaus' opinion, this is no longer weak. Snort. Hearing what Harlaus said, Don Juan sneered and said, have you ever heard of a 10-kilometer cross-country run with a weight of 30 kilograms? Ah! Harlaus was dumbfounded. 30 kilograms, carried 10 kilometers. This person is exhausted. Harold said in disbelief. In my hometown, soldiers in the army will have this kind of training. Don Juan said casually. My God, this is completely unimaginable. Harlaus was dumbfounded. He really couldn't imagine what it would be like to run 10 kilometers while carrying a 30-kilo load. If he was allowed to come, he might not be able to run 1 to 200 meters with a weight of 30 kilograms. Even the emperor's personal guards can't do it. How powerful should such an army be? Harlaus felt that he would never see such a powerful army in his life. My lord, where is your hometown? Harlaus felt the need to ask such a question. East, very far away, east, I won't be able to reach it in this life. Don Juan turned his head and looked towards the eastern sky, with an inexplicable look in his eyes. While the two were talking, some people almost finished running. At this moment, many people have already finished running at the gate of the town. It seems that although 2000 meters is a bit tiring for most people, it's not a big deal. Don Juan glanced roughly, and there were almost 400 people who finished the race first. Too much. Seeing this, Don Juan got on his horse and rode straight towards the gate of the town. Keep running. Run back and forth again. Don't stop this time. As long as the run is over, the top 300 can be selected into the recruit team. Each person is rewarded with another 10 copper coins. In addition, there will be pork to eat tonight. Eat as much as you want. Don Juan rode his horse directly to drive them away. The previous 2000 meters is not counted, but the current 2000 meters is the key point. Most of them were tired, and those who persisted for 2000 meters in this state were the recruits that Don Juan wanted. 10 copper coins, and pork to eat. Fight. Driven by Don Juan, many townspeople who had just stopped at the gate of the town and hadn't had a chance to take a break gritted their teeth, moved their tired legs, and continued to run. 10 copper coins, meat to eat. Menalia Kui Green's eyes suddenly lit up in the crowd, and she felt like her saliva was about to flow out. Meat? When was the last time she ate meat? It was the meat she stole from a small nobleman's house when she passed through the last town, almost 2 months ago. Reitai, hold on for a while. You can eat meat tonight. Ragnar kept encouraging his friend, hoping that he could finish the run with him. There is pork to eat. Lottie gritted her teeth and continued to run. When was the last time he ate meat? It was 2 months ago when he secretly went fishing in the river to eat raw fish. Because everything in the town is the property of the nobles, and the river is the same, and no one can fish without the permission of the Knight of the Rope, otherwise he will be killed. Lottie was really hungry before, and secretly caught fish to eat, but didn't dare to start a fire, so she ate it raw. After eating, I was almost stuck by the heinous number of fish bone, and then I had diarrhea for a week. If he didn't die, it was his fate. In the wilderness outside the town, there are many wild animals, but no one dares to hunt them. Firstly, those are also the property of noble lords. Once found, they will be executed immediately. Secondly, there are still many barbarians and orc tribes in the wilderness. Maybe they will encounter them at any time, and they will die even worse. So unless you are really starving to death, no one dares to take the risk. This is also the reason why there are no hunters in Ziyu town, and why they basically cannot eat meat. Almost 400 people who finished the first run started to run again. Why are you running again? A young man who had just run back asked out of breath. One more run back and forth, the top 300 can join the recruit team. And you can get 10 copper coins first, and you can have meat to eat at night. Ragnar took the lead, roaring. Ah! What? The young man was startled, and his mind was filled with those words, there is meat to eat tonight. Run! He didn't dare to stop listening, and immediately started running again. After 1000 meters, many people were out of breath and even wanted to stop and rest. Don't stop! Keep running! As soon as Don Juan saw such a person, he immediately rode his horse forward and drove behind him. Whoever dares to stop will be directly disqualified. Driven by this sentence, some people who could not run at first gritted their teeth and accelerated. At this moment, Harlaus was already waiting at the gate of the town. Number 1. Harlaus was taken aback, only to see Menalia jumping around with her little feet, looking at him expectantly. Chapter 13. I am number 1, number 1. Menalia stammered. You don't count. Harlaus pulled Menalia aside. At this moment Ragnar's tall figure was just running over. Harlaus said, Number 1, Ragnar. Why? Why don't I count? BD. Menalia's small face immediately became angry, and then she lifted her foot and stepped on Harlaus's foot. Oops! With a scream, Harlaus jumped up holding his feet, and then Menalia kicked again angrily, and Harlaus fell to the ground. Don Juan over there saw it and came on horseback. Okay Menalia, don't be angry, you are number one, Harlaus, mark it down. Said Don Juan. Yes, my lord. Harlaus had no choice but to write down the number one, Menalia. And some young people who were very tired running over from the side were taken aback. The first place is a woman. My god, we can't even compare to a woman. They couldn't tell whether they were shocked or disappointed. Heart blocked, and a little angry. No. We have to run again. I don't believe I can't outrun a woman. Immediately, a young man yelled, his tone full of unyielding. Yes, we have to run again, it is impossible that we are not as good as a woman. It's fine to lose to Ragnar, after all, their physiques are there, but now they are told that they can't even compare with a girl who is 1.6 meters tall. How can they swallow this breath? And the corners of Don Juan's mouth under the helmet curled up, his goal was achieved. He just used Menalia to stimulate these young people. Menalia may not be able to beat them in a fight, but Menalia has traveled a lot of time on the mainland, and she still has the ability to run around. So it's normal for them to win. Today's selection is over, Harlaus, write down the names of the first 300 people, and the recruit training will officially start in 3 days. Menalia. Don Juan ignored them and turned his head and shouted. Ah! Menalia turned her head and answered. You also participate in training together. Said Don Juan. Ha 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 ha. Great, great. Menalia's small face flushed red with excitement, and her emerald-like moist eyes were bent into 2 crescent moons. It's impossible for me to lose to such a girl. The recruit training is 3 days later, I will definitely win during the training. Ragnar secretly gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Obviously, it was impossible for him to accept that he had lost to a girl. That's the end of the simple selection. Some people may say that this is too simple. But there is no way, there are only so many people in Ziyu town, and the conscription is to make the taller out of the shorter ones. This is the fastest way to select the 300 people with the best physical fitness. No way, now the conditions are limited and the time is limited. Afterwards, there will be a month of recruit training for him, and Don Juan estimates that many people will be brushed off, leaving only 1/3 of them as real sergeants. At most 1 month, Earl Bergenrada's team is coming, and there will definitely be a fight. Don Juan must have his own armed team as soon as possible. The time soon came tonight. This night, Don Juan carried a few wild boars out of my world map. Each at least 300 caddies. All kinds of things in my world are very rich, and I have everything I want. For the powerful Don Juan, hunting couldn't be easier. Suddenly, in the center of town, the interior of the castle was filled with tables. In the center of the castle, several cauldrons were set up. At night the interior of the castle is brightly lit. Google gurgle. The water in several cauldrons was boiling hot, and the large pieces of pork were boiled white. There are enough spices and salt in it. These are Don Juan's own stock. All of a sudden, the fragrance splattered, and all the recruits stared straight at the cauldrons. Basically, they are all hopeless, and each of them is drooling down 3,000 feet. The number of times they can eat meat in this life can be counted on the fingers. Meat. Menalia even moved to the side of the pot with her whole body, sniffing constantly with her small nose. The emerald-like pupils could only see the meat in the pot at this moment, and seemed to be unable to see anything else. A few recruits were guarding the gate of the castle, and at the gate of the castle, a large number of townspeople gathered. They were also eager to see through, and each of them hooked their heads and kept looking into the castle. The sound of a large sniffing nose is constantly ringing. Ah, that's the pork in Legendary. It turns out that pork is not legendary, but really exists. A large number of townspeople are eager to see through, and the recruits guarding the gate of the castle are drooling, but they are unusually proud, and their faces are full of "I join the army, I am honored, I am proud." And because they respect Don Juan very much and their loyalty is not low, they didn't all cry and ask for pork. I have never eaten it in my life, so it will be a while. Cut, isn't it pork? A young man who was not selected as a recruit glanced at his mouth. Although he was drooling, he still said, I believe that under the leadership of Mr. Don Juan, our life will get better and sooner or later we will be able to buy it ourselves food. Yes, yes, if you can't eat it now, it doesn't mean you won't be able to eat it in the future. That's right, Lord Don Juan will definitely lead us to live a more prosperous life. The townspeople held back their saliva one by one as they spoke. This is the voice of all townspeople. They firmly believe that there will be better days under the leadership of Don Juan. Eating meat is just the difference between eating early and eating late. At this time, Don Juan waved his hand in the castle and said, Get out the first pot and give a piece to each of the townspeople. Ah! A recruit who was in charge of cooking was taken aback for a moment. My lord, didn't you say that only recruits can eat it? Heralds asked suspiciously. Yes, only recruits can eat it, but I hope you can learn one thing today. That is, the selflessness of soldiers. In my hometown, the soldiers in my hometown are a group of lovely and selfless people. They don't hesitate to give up their lives to save a stranger in the face of disaster. What are we? From now on we are the same army. Whose army is it? Asked Don Juan. Of course it is Lord Don Juan's army. We are only loyal to you. Ragnar replied without thinking. Yes, it's my army, but you are also the town's army, and everyone in the town is our family. The army not only needs to know how to fight and kill, but also needs to know how to protect it. Compared to fighting and killing, I prefer that the army is synonymous with protection. What is the army guarding? It's the people, it's ZU Town. If there is no ZU Town, would you still exist? When Don Juan said these words, all the recruits were a little confused. And the purpose of Don Juan's words is to create a new outlook on life for them. This is a very abstract thing, but Don Juan thinks it is better to shape this thing early. In this era, they can't understand Don Juan's words very well, but Don Juan believes that they will understand sooner or later. Ragnar on the side was thoughtful, and the next moment, his eyes became clear for a while, as if he understood something. And at this moment, Don Juan's system suddenly gave a notification. This hint made Don Juan very excited. Chapter 14. Ding! The army has been successfully established, and the collective glory has awakened. Collective glory passive. A sense of belonging is a personal quality that every soldier should have, and the loyalty of every soldier in the army is +10 by default. Ding! The army has awakened the first level army soul. Collective passive skill unlock. Collective passive skill, Guardian Soul. Effect: when defending any unit of one's own side, the army can withstand a casualty rate of more than 50%, and there will be a 20% chance of fighting to the death without retreating. In this era, if the general army's casualty rate exceeds 10%, they will be on the verge of being defeated, and if the casualty rate exceeds 20%, then they will be defeated. And what surprises Don Juan at this moment is the effect of guarding the army soul. Except for the modern army, the ancient army that can achieve more than 50% of its own casualties and continue to fight, not to mention the West, even among the ancient Hyuxia armies is one of the few. Both are famous armies in history. The Yu family army, the Qi family army, are all such powerful troops. Ding! The loyalty of recruits reaches 100 full value. Die hard. Ding! Recruit Lottie's loyalty reaches 100 full value. Die hard. Ding! Recruit Solar's loyalty reaches 100 full value. Die hard. Ding! Recruit's Pendragon loyalty reaches 100 full value. Die hard. As soon as the default loyalty +10 effect came out, the loyalty of several soldiers whose loyalty had already reached over 90 immediately became full. And Don Juan also silently wrote down the names of these people in his heart, plus Ragnar, who was the first to have full loyalty before, now Don Juan has 5 loyal loyalists. Under Don Juan's order, the first pot of meat was distributed to the townspeople outside. Of course, each of the townspeople only had a small piece of meat. The recruits, on the other hand, can eat with their stomachs open. As an army recruit, there must be preferential treatment. I got it, I finally got it, this is the meat in Legendary. A poor recruit since he was a child burst into tears the moment he took the first bite of pork and felt the soft and tender taste. For him at this moment, the piece of pork in front of him is completely a supreme delicacy. Menalia was holding a wooden bowl, smelling the fragrance, and the next moment she lay her face directly in the bowl, making her face covered with oil stains. "My lord, this is steamed." At this moment, a strange smell suddenly spread, and the recruit who was in charge of cooking swallowed his saliva and said, "My lord, what is this? I have never smelled this kind of fragrance before." In front of the cooking recruits is a big steamer. At this moment, there is a constant sweet smell coming out of the steamer. This is rice. When Don Juan smelled it, he suddenly felt hungry too. Rice. It's what Don Juan brought back from my world map. In my world map, Don Juan found a lot of wild, mature rice. After harvesting, it becomes rice. And without husking, it becomes rice directly after harvesting. It's a magical thing. Rice, what is rice? The cooking recruit kept smelling the sweet smell in the air, and he only felt that the saliva in his mouth had spread and overflowed. In this wilderness, the main crops are wheat and soybeans. And because of the inconvenient transportation around, many people have never seen such a thing as rice in their entire lives. Rice, I ate it when I was traveling in the south. Menalia on the other side immediately raised her head when she heard that. How is the taste? Immediately, a recruit next to him asked. No, not much. Eat, it tastes like a mouthful, and, it's almost like wheat. Menalia shook her head. Although she said so, her eyes were still fixed on the big steamer. In this era, the productivity is backward and the technology is not strong. Ordinary rice has to be hulled before it becomes rice. However, due to technical reasons, the hulling is not complete, so the rice in this world always feels a little hard to eat. Tie the mouth. But this, it smells so good. It's steamed, Menalia, try it. Don Juan smiled. The rice Don Juan brought from Minecraft was tasted beforehand. To be honest, Don Juan was completely taken aback by the first bite. The rice produced from my world is sweet and delicious, extremely soft, and it has a sweetness of its own. Don Juan can say in a responsible manner that even in his previous life in the 21st century, Don Juan had never eaten such delicious rice. The steamer opened, and a large amount of water vapor immediately scattered around. This hot air made everyone unable to bear to take a step back. But the next moment, all eyes are straightened. Under the light of the surrounding bonfires and the refraction of the surrounding water vapor, the white rice in the steamer piled up together, and each one was extremely round and crystal clear. It even reflected part of the fire, looking like some kind of treasure. Oh my god, this kind of food really looks like gold and silver, no different. Harlaus on the side held his own bowl and spoke dully. There is no need for a spoon, just use the bowl to buckle up, and it will be a bowl of rice immediately. This kind of rice is called bright silver rice. After eating, it has the effect of strengthening the body. Everyone eats it openly. From now on, this bright silver rice will be the main food for our soldiers. Don Juan smiled. Of course, the bright silver rice was invented by Don Juan himself. In my world map, this kind of rice can be seen everywhere. In the future, Don Juan also plans to use this bright silver rice to breed a weakened version of common rice as a foreign trade version. Don Juan has exempted the townspeople from taxes for the past 2 years, so it can be said that they basically have no income, so Don Juan has to find a way to make money. There are copper mines in my world, mint copper coins by yourself, or form a caravan to buy things. For Don Juan, it wasn't very difficult. Looking at the recruits eating and drinking in the castle, Don Juan's thoughts drifted to my world map. Chapter 15. The construction of the smelting furnace in my world map is still going on, but because there is only Don Juan, it is inevitable that it will be slower. The most urgent task now is to build the smelting furnace first. As long as there is a smelting furnace, then steel can be smelted on a large scale. Thinking of this, Don Juan also thought of many other things. That is to enter the Minecraft team needs to expand. Don Juan has only one person, and one person is still too little. But the candidates to enter my world must be strictly selected, and only those who are 100% loyal and will never betray can enter. System, open the troop list. Don Juan said silently in his heart. The next moment, a virtual list that only Don Juan could see appeared in the air. Leader, Don Juan. Hero unit, none. 1 elf scout of arms. 300 recruits from Zu town. Elf scout? Don Juan looked at Minalia, who was eating silver rice all over her face. It's this little girl. The remaining 300 recruits did not have a single hero unit. But it doesn't matter, there are no hero units, you can cultivate hero units yourself. Soon, 3 days passed. During these 3 days, Don Juan ordered people to build a simple military camp by the river in Zu town. They were all wooden houses, and each room had 5 bunk beds. From now on, it will be the place where the recruits live. During these 3 days, Don Juan was exhausted. Kill sheep like crazy in Minecraft world map. Then take the wool and synthesize woolen sweater and woolen trousers. The original version of Minecraft does not. Then kill the squid in the river to take the ink sac and make it into black dye. After that, the simple 300 sets of black recruit uniforms are considered complete. It's autumn now, and winter is coming, so the hair is the military uniform made of wool. Come here, recruits, to receive your ID badges and items. The recruit camp, where 300 recruits gathered. Recruit Ragnar. Recruit Lottie. I'm here. This is your recruit ID card. Lottie ran forward excitedly, and Harlaus handed him a wooden sign. Lottie took the wooden sign with his name written on it. Although he couldn't read, he liked it no matter what. He couldn't help but keep making gestures to his friends. Ragnar next to him was very speechless. There are also your daily necessities, such as wool quilts, tableware, and military uniforms. Lottie touched the military uniform that had just been issued to him, and his eyes widened immediately, and he stopped looking at his recruit's wooden sign. This feeling. This is a sweater. He widened his eyes and screamed. Oh my god, woolen sweaters, woolen quilts, these are things that only noble lords can use. It turned out to be true, this was sent directly to us. The recruits who received their uniforms and daily necessities were shocked. Lottie was also frightened, but he knew that Knight Lasso, who used to be the management knight of Zu town, also had a woolen coat. As for that woolen coat, it can be said that Lasso cavaliers can't put it down, and he is not willing to wear it at all. Only in winter, by chance, Lottie could see Knight Lasso wearing that woolen coat. But now, looking at the texture and feel of the military uniforms issued to them, it is very smooth in the hand, and it looks extremely delicate. I'm afraid it's even more exquisite than the woolen coat owned by Knight Lasso back then, and I don't know how many times better. Is this military uniform expensive? Ragnar was taken aback, looking at the black military uniform in his hand. The military uniforms of the other recruits are all about the same size, because the other people are basically the same height, with an average height of 1.7 meters, and there is basically no difference according to this standard. But Ragnar is more than 2 meters tall, and he may have reached 2.23 meters. The material for this body is enough to make Common's 2 bodies. Ragnar looked at Don Juan on the other side, and it was obvious that it was specially made for Ragnar by Don Juan. For a moment, Ragnar had an indescribable feeling. It turned out that Lord Don Juan cared so much about these recruits. Me, mine. Menalia hopped and dangled in front of Don Juan. Don Juan clutched his forehead. He was busy a few days ago and forgot about this little girl. Looking at Menalia's green emerald eyes, Don Juan couldn't say, no. I had to say first, there is no such a small one as you, I will give it to you at night. Night. Hey, sweater. Menalia was obviously very happy, although it was a bit late, but it was not without. Follow me, recruits. After the recruits had collected their belongings, Don Juan led them to the barracks. According to the number on the wooden sign, find the corresponding house number. The recruits looked at their wooden signs, and as expected, there were numbers on them. On the doors of each room in the barracks, there are corresponding numbers. From 1 to 30. There are 10 people in each room, which is also a class. 300 people are divided into 30 classes. Although the recruits could not read, they still knew the general numbers more or less. First shift. Ragnar and Lottie were assigned to the same class, and they went straight into the first room with their daily belongings. This is where we will live from now on. Oh my god, the sheets on these beds are so soft. When Lottie saw the woolen blanket on the wooden bed, he immediately jumped on it and shouted loudly. He has never slept in such a comfortable bed in his life. First shift. At this moment, Don Juan walked in. Ah! Your Excellency! Immediately, everyone was shocked, and unconsciously stood up straight. Well, now I will explain to you the various rules of the barracks. You must remember them well. I will conduct random checks tonight. After you memorize them, you will be the supervisory team to supervise all the recruits. Do you understand? If you have any questions, you have to report first, and ask after you get permission. Don Juan looked at everyone with sharp eyes. Yes. My lord. My lord, why are we the supervisory team? Lottie couldn't help asking. Don Juan looked at him directly, his eyes were sharp, and Lottie couldn't help but shuddered. I said that I have to make a report first before asking, but remember this punishment first, and you will give it to me before dinner tonight. Run 10 laps around the barracks, and the others will be punished the same if they commit crimes. Run 10 laps. The others were shocked and remembered this firmly. Chapter 16. Here, Don Juan demonstrates to the 10 men of the first squad and explains the simple rules of the barracks. For example, things must be arranged properly and no random placement is allowed. Everyone has their own locker. Every morning when I get up, the quilt must be folded neatly, otherwise I will be punished. Take the bugle as an example, everyone must gather when they hear the bugle. The most important one is to learn to obey. In the future, each squad will have its own sergeant major, and every third squad will have a flag general. 300 people were divided into 10 banners. This is the simple plan of Don Juan's current army. Bang 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 bang. The sound of the gong that resounded throughout the barracks sounded, and all the recruits were alarmed. They came out to watch one by one. What happened? Everyone, come out and assemble. Of course, Ragnar refused to let him serve as the inspector sergeant major, and he brought his own inspector squad to integrate the recruits. According to Lord Don Juan's order, we are the supervisory squad. All recruits are arranged according to the squad, with 10 people in each squad, from high to low. Second class, third class, fourth class, go on like this. Ragnar yelled. And Don Juan was watching. After all, it is impossible for him to do everything himself. While training new recruits, it also cultivates a team of officers. When queuing up, the recruits were confused for a long time, and it took almost half an hour before they formed a similar queue. 300 people, 100 people in a square formation, were divided into 3 square formations and arranged on the playground of the barracks. Me, what class am I in? When Don Juan turned his head, he saw Minalia looking up at him. This little girl. Don Juan felt a little headache, and said casually, "You have a squad called the Scout Squad, and you are the Sergeant Major of the Scout Squad." "Yeah. Me, I'm a Sergeant Major too." Minalia jumped for joy. Don Juan shook his head, until now he still had the feeling of coaxing a child. "Okay, remember your current cue. You will line up like this in the future. Now I will explain to you the rules in the barracks." As Ragnar spoke, he glanced at Don Juan and found that Don Juan was looking at him approvingly, which undoubtedly excited Ragnar's heart. Immediately worked harder. Ragnar had a good memory, and explained everything Don Juan told him to the recruits verbatim. "Okay, Ragnar, you did a good job, return to the team." Under Don Juan's order, the inspection team was also included in a phalanx of 90 people. When you enter the barracks, you are soldiers. In the recruit assessment after 1 month, I only want the most outstanding 100. In other words, 200 of you will be eliminated. And if you don't obey the rules, you will be kicked out of the barracks in advance. As soon as these words came out, all the recruits suddenly became nervous. After all, none of them wanted to be kicked out of the barracks. If they were kicked out of the barracks early because they didn't obey the rules, it would leave a stain on their lives. The training on the first day is very simple, that is to stand. Every hour, Don Juan would let them rest for a while. Then let them follow the slogan to go forward. When Don Juan explained to them how to lift the left foot and the right foot according to the slogan, he found that most of the recruits were in a constant daze. Most of the recruits couldn't even tell the left from the right. Helpless, Don Juan could only tie a cloth strip to their right hands, and told them that the direction with the cloth strip was the right. Then it's training. The first day of training was, to be honest, ugly. This reminded Don Juan of the military training he had done when he was in college in his previous life. To be honest, the performance of recruits is not as good as that of students in military training. But at any rate, time passed like this, and the recruits still made some progress. At least it won't be confused anymore. After a day of training, all the recruits suffered from sore backs, and several people even helped each other walk when they entered the cafeteria to eat. I didn't expect training to be so tiring, 10 times more tiring than doing farm work. Lottie was basically dragged away by Ragnar, he complained in his mouth. You can quit when you are tired. Ragnar rode. He has now basically entered the role of the Sergeant Major of the inspection squad. Ragnar, why did Lord Don Juan ask us to carry out these trainings? Is it of any use? A recruit rubbed his thigh and asked puzzledly. Immediately, the other recruits also looked at Ragnar. Because of the high degree of loyalty to Don Juan, they basically did their best to fulfill Don Juan's requirements, and they didn't dare to ask any questions during the training. Ask Ragnar only after training. Ask me to supervise the Sergeant Major. From now on, we will all be soldiers, and everything will be strictly required. Ragnar said with a straight face, and then said, Master Don Juan told me that this can train our discipline, and discipline in the army is very important. Discipline. Everyone else was taken aback, not understanding. Wow! You can eat meat for dinner today. Suddenly, a loud cry caught the attention of all the recruits. On the dining table in the cafeteria, there are large basins being put on it one by one. Time to eat. Immediately, all the recruits rushed over, greedily smelling the aroma of the food. Eat mutton today. A middle-aged man in charge of cooking shouted loudly. Mutton! My God! I didn't expect soldiers to eat so well. Ah! This thing, is this the bright silver rice I ate a few nights ago? Many recruits couldn't wait to take out their tableware. All the recruits crowded in front of the dining table. Don't squeeze. Line up to eat according to your class. At this time Ragnar stood up spontaneously, and he roared loudly. At this moment, Ragnar has officially entered the role of Sergeant Major in his inspection squad. You What class are you in? 10. Class 17. Go back to your team. Don Juan stood at the entrance of the cafeteria and observed secretly, nodding his head from time to time. Obviously, Ragnar did have the potential to be an officer. As for the mutton eaten in the canteen, for a period of time, the canteen will basically eat mutton, which is directly related to Don Juan's frenzied killing of sheep in Minecraft. Right now, a large amount of mutton has accumulated in Don Juan's system portable space. After killing the sheep and taking the wool, you can't just throw the mutton away, of course it's impossible, so the recruits have become the solution to the mutton. Chapter 17. Ah! I want to eat lamb. The recruits in the barracks were devouring their meals, and a scream came from far away outside the barracks. 10 laps. Run. You can eat after running. I will never dare to make a mistake next time. Lottie and several recruits who made mistakes ran around the barracks, screaming one by one. Pendragon is the son of a poor farmer in Zu town. If there is no accident, he will also be a farmer in the future, and all his descendants will be farmers. Just last year, his father was beaten to death by the previous noble Lasso Knight because he couldn't pay the taxes. So Pendragon has always had a hatred in his heart. Hatred of nobility. Recently, a new noble came to Zu town, replacing Knight Lasso. Some hoped for the young new nobleman, but Pendragon didn't think so. Pendragon believes that all the nobles in the world are like that, they are all a bunch of stingy vampires, and they should all be burned alive on a cross like those dark vampires caught by the church a few years ago. Just as the young nobleman summoned the townspeople to promulgate a new tax decree, Pendragon hid in his bosom a stone cone he had polished himself. He swore that if this vampire aristocrat dared to issue a decree to increase taxes again, he would take out an awl and stab him to death. Even if he dies with him, he must kill this vampire nobleman. But when the decree of the young nobleman's tax exemption came out, Pendragon was stunned. When he came back to his senses, all the companions around him were cheering. And there was water running across his face. What's this? The young man wiped his face with his hand. It's tears. After returning home that night, he cried, crying badly, and also suffered from insomnia. If this young nobleman had come a year earlier, then his father would not have been beaten to death alive. Later, when the young noble lord faced 30 soldiers alone and snatched their food back with his own hands, Pendragon swore in his heart. If given the chance, he would devote his whole life to this lord. Even if he dies, even if he is torn to pieces, he will crawl back from hell and continue to serve that lord. When the young aristocrat wanted to be recruited, he, who was not physically strong, pushed forward desperately, wanting to join the army and serve his lord with allegiance. He gritted his teeth and insisted on entering the team of 300 recruits, and he found that the adults were really kind to them. The military uniforms and utensils distributed to them were all he had never seen before. According to Lottie, these things are things that other nobles don't necessarily have. After a day of training, the exhausted Pendragon fell asleep on a soft wool bed. This was unprecedented in his entire life, sleeping so comfortably. Lord Don Juan, even if I die and crawl back from hell, I am still willing to serve you as a devil. Bang 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 bang. Sudden. It was deafening, like a gong that could pierce the eardrums, beating crazily. FK, what's wrong? Pendragon got up from the bed in a jerk. Quick! Get up soon! Oh, it's dawn. In the barracks, Manalia's small body was beating wildly with a gong in one hand and a hammer in the other. While knocking, he stuttered and shouted. There was a smirk and excitement on the delicate and beautiful little face. And Don Juan was beside him with a kind smile on his face. Emergency assembly training. Those who haven't assembled within 1 minute will run 10 laps around the barracks tomorrow morning. Ragnar stood beside Don Juan, shouting loudly. Where is hell? This is hell! Countless recruits uttered helpless shouts, but they did not dare to neglect anything. Lottie and the other recruits who were punished are a lesson from the past. On the other hand,
वीडियोस बनाने हैं, फिल्मोरा है ना।